Well, I grew up in the 1970s. It was a silly decade, as James Lilacs likes to say. It was a wide decade. I had ties so wide you could land a jet on them. I grew up at a time when You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone was the #1 rock and roll song in the country. It was a bleak time, but even worse than that, the 70s were the beginning of the era of pseudoscience. It was the beginning of the popularization of pseudoscience in areas of things like ancient astronauts and the Bermuda Triangle and so on, all of which was made manifest by the most evil show in human history called In Search Of, where these nutcase ideas are presented and absolutely no proof is provided. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and all of that to say that every now and then, a guy who can do some math, somebody who can come up with some fundamental numbers, will simply not just refute an argument, they'll disassemble it, they'll destroy it. In the case of the pseudoscience of the Bermuda Triangle, I remember hearing about the disappearance of was it Flight 19 and the Sulfur Queen and all these disappearances. And was it caused by pockets of methane? Maybe there's a black hole, some kind of wormhole, a vortex that might suck stink fat, because all of these ships are disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle. And somebody came along, somebody who could add, and they said, if you take an area the size of the Bermuda Triangle and overlay it on any of the trade routes in the world, you get the same number of disappearances. And that was the end of the Bermuda Triangle, for me anyway. Guys, somebody has just done this with the green energy thing. Somebody who can add has, to me, simply put the issue into the ground, not that it's going to make any difference. We found it on Steve Green's Insanity Wrap over at Instapundit, and here is the answer for our green energy future, which we talked about just a few episodes ago. Are you ready? It's a tweet, and the tweet reads, from Willis Eschenbach, who, by the way, sounds like the kind of guy who could do math. He writes, idiocy. First, they say no fossil fuel cars after 2035. In the U.S., we drive 3.2 trillion miles per year. Electric cars use approximately 0.3 kilowatt hours per mile. We'll need to build a 1 gigawatt nuclear plant every 3 weeks starting tomorrow, just for the extra electricity to charge the cards. And I'm thinking he might have wanted to say cars there, but nevertheless, there you go. One new nuclear 1 gigawatt power plant every 3 weeks, starting now, in order to have nothing but electric cars on the road in 2035. Scott, I just don't think we're going to make it.
Is that first plant scheduled for construction? Is it about to? Are they about to pour the foundation for this?
Yeah, we're
I don't think you're fully getting the point, Scott. They gotta design it. They've got to do the architectural work, get the permits. They got to clear the ground. They got to put the foundation. They got to build the whole thing. They got to do it in 3 weeks, and then they immediately have to start on the next one. So it's more pressing than it seems.
Well, the second one will be easier, because it's kind of like a McDonald's franchise. You just plop the same building down.
They'll get it down to one every
street
2 or 3 hours, undoubtedly.
The sad thing about, I guess, the hubris of becoming an elected official is that you don't understand that you're just sent there as a public servant, and you suddenly think that we've sent you there to solve all of our problems, and somehow you're going to force civilization to advance to the point that you dreamed of. Civilization is advancing at a blinding pace. Science and industry and technology and all of that is miraculous, and stuff is happening so fast. But the problem is it doesn't happen during one presidential term. And so you can't claim credit for it. And you can't say, I've solved all these problems. Electric cars are catching on. And the reason electric cars are catching on is because Teslas are smoking hot. They're awesome cars. People want one. And if the people in office understood the attraction principle rather than the compulsion principle is a much more effective tool of getting what you want, then they would essentially hold out a vision, but not try to force our compliance with that vision. They would maybe try to influence us through movies or songs or whatever, but not politics, into advancing into this future. How many people have ever seen like a fantastic science fiction movie and thought, I want one of those hover cars? You know, doesn't everybody want one of those hover cars? And so there are guys in their garage all over the country right now trying to build hover cars, and I've seen some of them, and they're flying. This stuff is happening. So that's I think the prime difference between somebody who takes a view of government as the controlling entity of society and someone like me who takes the view of government as just kind of a referee that kind of works in the back shop and just keeps things from bumping into each other if possible, and tries to keep people from getting hurt, and and regulates disputes and things like that. If you take that kind of approach to it and say, let's free people up to do what they really love to do, how many of us would love the idea of saying, I don't have to go to the gas station every week and fill up my car. I can fill up my car in my garage. That's really handy. I really don't care what the technology is to let me do that. In fact, this weekend, I told my wife early in the weekend, I'm like, holy cow, I've got my car is on E, the light is lit up, and I've got to remember to fill this up. I didn't remember to fill it up. Like, my wife had to remind me late yesterday. She goes, you really need to get gas in that car before you go to work. And I was like, oh yeah, it's the hassle. I've got to drive over there. If I could come home and just plug my car in and it was always ready to go, I'd be very excited about that. That's what motivates people, having cool things that can do amazing stuff that save us time and effort and that make life more fun. Hello, President Biden, and anybody else who thinks that you can somehow force this down our throats. Why not hold it out as a carrot rather than beat us with a stick?
Because they like beating people with sticks.
Yeah.
By the way, my father once asked me what the best part of being full-time employed was when I finally got a job as an editor. I remember telling him I get to fill up the car instead of putting $4 of gas.
Oh, I remember
2
those
days later, put in another $5 of gas. Scott, I just want to back up just for 1 second to something you mentioned on the backstage show. One of the reasons people like electric cars is because of all the free electricity everywhere. You can just pull up outside a gas station or outside of a Whole Foods and just plug it in and get free electricity so you can run your car for free. And you had an interesting point to make about that.
Well, it's free now. My wife and I, for the first time in a little over a year, went to a movie this weekend. Imagine, we went to a theater and we didn't have to wear masks in the theater. And anyway, as we pulled up to the theater, I noticed that right next to the handicap spots, which are in the front row facing the theater, there were several slots where you could pull up and you could charge your car. And it was free. And when I saw those, I said to my wife, they're free now. Soon they'll be charging for them, because when I started driving, you could pull into any gas station in America and fill your tires with air at no charge.
Yes, you could.
It was always free. Now, it got really terrible for a while because before they made them possible to use with credit cards, you had to have change with you. So if you had a tire that was low on air, you had to pump quarters into this machine. And if it was after hours and there's no place to get quarters, you were doomed.
You were doomed.
That's right. It was terrible. It was death for everybody. But anyway, now the charging stations are free because the theater thinks that they look progressive by having a couple of free charging stations and they want to promote this. But pretty soon, they're all going to be charging for it because it costs money to generate electricity because people have to do it. And people like to get paid for doing stuff. This is Economics 101 brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com.
This is, Steve, this is the whole point of this constant tirade against this green energy thing is not that I have a problem with green energy. I have a problem with the unicorn dust aspect of clean energy. And so my question to you, Steve, is for those people who think that the government is the solution to anything and everything, why is it that the entire United States government is not capable of doing the simple calculation that Mr. Willie Eisenbach was capable of doing apparently in the space of about 20 seconds on the back of a napkin? If you're going to mandate no fossil fuel cars after 2035, you would think that in the entire government, somebody would say, let's just think for a second about how much electricity we're going to, gigawatt plant every 3 weeks? Is it just me?
Oh, Bill, we're gonna need 3 of those every 3 weeks just to pay for the Bitcoin miners' power needs. Forget about the electric cars. We're in a deep hole here. The thing is, it's just like the welfare programs. Welfare programs are politically very popular. Taxes are not. We have a problem. Saving the earth is very popular. Paying for it, not so much. Quick word on Tesla before I actually answer the question. I have such mixed feelings about that company. I think the Model S is just one of the most handsome sedans anyone's made in the last 15 years. The Model R, the little roadster you can't find anymore, it's built on a Lotus platform. That thing is gorgeous. But if you're going to charge six figures for the Model X, the CUV, it better look like a six-figure car, and that one doesn't. The gull-wing door is
like a plastic boat.
Yeah. And the Model 3 rhymes with Model T was the first thing I clued into on that. Well, it just fine, but again, give it some pizzazz, give it a little muscle, give it some heft, give it something. It's not there. That said, the idea of having 18 moving parts between the power plant and the road is a game changer. Somebody would produce the electric vehicle for me. The closest I've seen, being a Colorado guy, is Jeep just came out with the Wrangler 2X or 4XE, which is a hybrid Wrangler that has a battery only mode, and it's got huge torque for getting up over rocks. And I'm thinking that might be my next car. Anyway, that aside, if we were serious about saving the planet, if indeed the planet needs saving, we would be on a crash program to build small thorium reactors. We saw designs for these 10 years ago, 12 years ago, about the size of a phone booth, if anybody remembers what those are, enough to power a big neighborhood or a small town. You just drop these things anywhere. They don't produce any weapons grade bad things or anything like that.
Can't melt down, don't get hot enough.
Totally
25 megawatts for 25 years, no maintenance.
Exactly. I offered to just plant one in my backyard. I don't care. I'm not using a big part of my backyard. Take it. I'll power the neighborhood. Come on by. It'll be great. We've been on a crash program to start churning these out the way Tesla started churning out Model 3s. But we're not. This tells me one of two things, maybe both. Either we're not serious about saving the world, or the left has every intention of eliminating internal combustion engine cars. They just have no intention of making electric vehicles attainable or affordable or drivable for the masses of humanity. They plan to put the rest of us on bicycles or trains or whatever else, but they want to take our cars away. You can't lord it over us anymore. So this is their way of doing that. I am forced to assume, because they're not doing any of the things necessary to make the future that they tell us they want possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve. It's a perfect segue for my quotes, because while I grew up in the 70s, most of my formative years were in the 60s. And one of the things that impressed me so much were the things that are all over the place in the studio here. If you could see them, it's the artwork of Sid Mead. Sid Mead was a futurist for General Motors, I think, in the early 1960s. And he showed us a future where everything was clean, everything was slick, everything worked, everything was cool. I've come to hate the green energy movement, and I've come to hate it because it's not based in anything that is actually attainable. But when I think about it, I find I don't have any problem with electric cars at all. Yeah. I don't have any problem with any of this stuff. I think non-emissions is great. I just think that the only way to get there is the only way to get there, which is through clean, abundant nuclear energy, which is exactly what this guy is talking about. This is entirely the problem. We could solve our electrical infrastructure vulnerabilities to things like EMP and terror attacks if we were to simply do what Steve said, decentralize the whole thing. You got a reactor that sits in the corner there, and it powers these 10,000 houses, and it cannot melt down. It's not an engineering thing, and we go on and on and on. But the future that I was expecting was a future where you literally could grow cotton in the desert because energy is essentially free. You pump seawater in through a big old tube, you desalinate it, you put the water down there, and everybody's happy. But no, you cannot get where they want to go from here without the pixie dust. And there is no pixie dust. And it's this not only aversion to reality, this this terror of reality that is the thing that drives me nuts about these people. When I saw this tweet, I knew I wanted to talk about it because there's the problem. This is not speculation. If you're saying that everything after 2035 is going to be an electric car, this is how much energy we're going to need to charge just the cars. We're not worried about that. That's not our problem. Our problem is the green energy, high-paying union jobs that are going to be coming if you just vote for me again. And it's just childishness, and reality will not be denied. But of all the things I saw in this, thing I liked the most was that kind of Bermuda Triangle, stake through the heart kind of analysis. The only two other examples I've seen that come close to this are both from relatively recent past. I remember in the early days of the Iraq War, when they were talking about depleted uranium shells that we were using, and they were saying, well, this is irradiating, we're going to cause birth defects in Iraqi kids and so on. And the long-lamented Stephen Dembest said, speaking as an engineer, he said, I could make a statue of you out of depleted uranium, and you could hug it for a couple of hours, and you would irradiate the statue. Boom, solved. After the Fukushima accident, somebody said, maybe we should evacuate these people, setting up the little trap here. Maybe we should evacuate these people from Japan or near Fukushima, put them on a plane, fly them to Los Angeles, get them away from the radiation. That sounds like a great idea, except they'll take more of a radiation dose on a 12-hour flight through the stratosphere than they would living where they are right now. These kind of quantifiable arguments are what define the outposts of reality, and I try to stay inside my boundaries that are marked out by people that can add numbers up like this guy and like Steve Dembest and like the other ones. It's very simple. I don't have to fight reality. I understand it's there, and it doesn't care for my feelings. As Ben Shapiro said, it's simply there. We either deal with it or not. That's the choice. And for a political party and political philosophy that is doing everything in its power to simply pretend that reality doesn't exist, it takes a lot of nerve for people like that to say we should follow the science. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.